Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Monday morning, 10:52. Another beautiful day. Yesterday was a pretty hot day. It was surprisingly warm, but really beautiful day. So hope everyone's doing good. I'm in the process now of uploading a video on a really fantastic director. I think one of the most original directors of our time, Paul Thomas Anderson. Huge fan of his. I got to see his brand new movie last night, One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Benicio del Toro and Sean Penn. What a thrilling experience. I wanted to do. I was trying to go. I really wanted to see this movie. I definitely am a big fan of Paul Thomas Anderson, and I had been trying to go see it. And earlier in the week, it just opened. Actually, when did it actually open? I think it opened up on Friday. Yeah, I think it opened up on Friday, and I was almost going to go see it Friday, or actually Friday or Saturday. Saturday I was going to try to see it, but then things didn't quite work out. But then I was able to get in touch with a buddy of mine, and we went last night to see it at the Colonial Theater in Belfast. So, and but leading up to that, which will be kind of in the order or the sequence that I was intended to go for, I I'm uploading a video right now on Paul Thomas Anderson as the man and the director. I talked about all of his movies, my experiences with seeing some of his films. A few of them I've seen in the theater. My favorites, my favorite being There Will Be Blood. Boogie Nights is another one that's just incredible. But I've been following his career for a long time. The only movie of his that I don't, that I, well, I kind of take it back. I actually could not, I kind of want to revisit it. I just, I tried, I remember renting it when it came out, and I didn't make it all the way through. I thought it was very, I don't know, just, it felt a little bit uninspired and it felt a little bit bland, because usually that is not the case with any of his films or his work. But that was, and I never saw it all the way through. But I kind of want to give it another chance, and that is Licorice Pizza, which I think starred Joaquin Phoenix. That's really the only movie of his that I'm not really a big fan of, but I'm willing to give it another chance. It was a very different, like, maybe a departure for a lot of his work. His films are very stark. They have a good sense of humor to them. There's he's able to talk about socio political things, as or introduce those things as themes in his films without being, I guess, too heavy handed or on the nose. And he definitely has this postmodern kind of surrealistic quality to his films. If you want to use the word art house quality, he has a little bit of this flair where he has like a European kind of vision. But anyway, so I was One Battle After Another. It was a movie I've been really wanting to see, and I was really anticipating to see it. And we went last night to see this film, and I heard for the most part that this movie was pretty good. I stayed away from spoilers and all, and I only saw one trailer for this film. There's been, I think there were like two or three trailers for this film, and I pretty much stayed away from it. It came up. I was actually, the way I heard about this movie, because it's been, it's been a few years since I've seen any of his newer films, or since, it's been few years since he's put out a film. So I knew he was probably going to obviously be putting out more films. But I remember when I heard about this movie, I was actually at the Colonial Theater in Belfast. I was there with a friend. I think it might have been the same friend I saw the movie last night with Zafra. They in the downstairs, the Dreamland Theater at the Colonial Theater, they have these two big areas, basically where they give away free movie posters. And there was a poster on the table that was for One Battle After Another, and it said that it was coming out in late September. And I was like, huh, what the hell's that about? And I was like, oh, it's a Paul Thomas Anderson movie and stars Leonardo DiCaprio. Wow, that sounds pretty wild. It kind of looked like an action film to a degree. And again, I'm a big fan of his work. And then I remember seeing a little trailer for it, and I was like, wow, like this looks really cool. And I have to say, this movie was just awesome. I think it's one of his best films. I think it's there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of stuff going on in this film. There's a lot of I always think it's fascinating, and I'm a big fan of when a filmmaker can really bring multiple genres to a particular project. So it's not really, you can't just say, make this cut and dry description of the film saying, well, it's definitively a mystery film, or definitively an action film, or a comedy, or what have you. One Battle After Another really blends multiple genres all at once. It's pretty thrilling. And I did see, and I did hear that this movie was, close to 3 hours. I think it's like 2 hours and 49 minutes or something like that. I mean, typically his films are on the longer side of things. And it's interesting. I think his films have they're, they have this very epic feel to them. This film, I think, is an epic. I think it's an epic. It's a film that's meant to be seen on the big screen. It is a reason to go to the theater. I think that is the best way to experience this movie. And I think it's interesting because I think his style has like this classic classical way of making films. Like when I think of like movies that came out, big Hollywood movies that came out in like the 50s or 60s. When I think of movies like Giant, or maybe some John Ford classics, um, movies like Dr. Zhivago, like classic Hollywood films, I think he has this real interesting style because I feel like his movies really harken back to that kind of classic period of filmmaking where films were these kind of sweeping epics. But yet his style is very, very different because it has this experimental edge to them, and there's also this kind of postmodern vibe. So it's kind of a real interesting blend, I think, with these unique styles that something that has this kind of classic feel, with the scale of it, but then it's very unique and very, I guess if you want to use the term art house based or experimental. He messes with your expectations big time as a filmmaker. Doesn't really have these typical tropes that you see in Hollywood films. So it's interesting. It's kind of it's like two different worlds going on, and I think he there isn't a whole lot of directors that I feel make movies on that scale, like in regards to that you know scope of like classic Hollywood filmmaking. I think Martin Scorsese has that quality, obviously, to his films. His films are pretty much these big, kind of sweeping epics, but very interesting with how he can blend these styles. And the cast for this film is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it's totally stacked. I mean, we have Leonardo DiCaprio, who I really feel as an actor can't really do anything wrong. A huge fan of his work. I've always been a big fan, and of course Benicio del Toro. I'm a huge fan of Benicio del Toro. he plays such an interesting role in this movie too. He's not in it very long, but his presence is so strong in this movie. And also Sean Penn, tremendous, tremendous actor. The rest of the cast for this film, which there were a few other actors that I had never seen before. Tiana Taylor is extraordinary, and also Chase Infinity, two actresses I'd never seen before, who are essentially a mother daughter combination. Just incredible. And the thing that's so awesome about this movie, again, I'm a big fan of when a film can, or a director can take on can create a project or a movie that, isn't afraid to blend so many different styles. Like really a primetime example of like this kind of cross pollination, if you will. This film has so many influences. I think on one hand, it's a western. I think this movie is like a thriller, like a full th- full throttle thriller. I think it's a black comedy. I think it's a also a very much a melodrama or a drama. I think the film is really based on this theme of family, particularly around a father daughter relationship. And I also feel this movie is kind of a balls to the wall action movie. So it's like there's so many different things going on as far as influences. I saw a little interview last night when I came home. I watched an interview with Paul Thomas Anderson, and he was talking about movies that he was very much inspired. And he talked a lot about The Unforgiven being a big influence on this movie, quite a few other films, and it was really interesting. And I could see that. I can see how that was a big thing. And one of the other things I came across was I saw an interview also fairly recently with Benicio del Toro, and he was saying how this movie was really, he felt there were sequences and things in this movie that were really inspired by Steven Spielberg's first film, Duel, which is, I love that movie to death. That's one of my favorites. And I saw this in an interview with him. He was doing a press junket interview with with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he mentioned that, and I was like, wow, like that's pretty wild. That's not what I thought this movie was going to be about, or or go in that area. And I have to say, after watching it last night, big time, because there's a car chase scene that I think is one of the best car chase sequences I've ever seen. Incredible. Vanishing Point. Paul Thomas Anderson also mentioned Vanishing Point as being one of the most influential movies on this film too, as far as the chase sequences and the action, which you can completely see in this movie. And it has this like gritty. It's a very gritty, realistic portrayal of well, I mean, essentially, this film is about these, it's kind of modeled off of a group from the '60s called the Weather Underground. This movie was based on, loosely based on a book that came out in the '60s called The Vine, which I haven't read, but I saw some interviews and he was talking, DiCaprio and Paul Thomas Anderson were talking about this movie being really influenced by groups, radical um, groups like the Weather Underground. And, and the Weather Underground was a group in the '60s that they were not responsible for killing anyone, but they did blow up a bunch of federal buildings. They got a lot of attention. They eventually most of them got caught and are still in prison, but they did break up and they went underground after a while, after the FBI and the federal government was after them. So it's kind of a portrayal of that, and then the ramifications of of what that would entail to be in that kind of an organization. So but then it also shows kind of the consequences of those kinds of actions and what that can lead to. And again, but the thing that's so cool about this movie is it it deals with our reality, with how where our country is right now. But it's not. I don't feel like. I don't know. It's really an interesting balance because I feel like this movie is so. Even though it's got all these elements and it's a very heavy movie and it's dealing with like real life issues, but and yet it's got elements of like a western, a big influence from the western genre. It's a very suspenseful film. It's got incredible action, and this movie is incredibly funny too. Incredibly funny. And again, it's also a very serious and stark and dark movie and violent movie, but it has a really high entertainment value to it. It's a super entertaining movie. And to me, it's wild how Paul Thomas Anderson was able to strike that balance of where it's dealing with so much stuff and things that we are, that are just so hard, such a horrible part of our reality, but yet it's still healthy escapism. Like I felt like even though it was so all of these things were hitting home, and because of our current state, it was still one hell of a thrill ride. It was a thrilling movie. It was a thrill ride, and I felt like it gave that experience of being entertained too. It's a very entertaining film. So it's fascinating how he was able as a director to really pull off all of these different things, all of these and have all these different colors and have a certain levity to his films of where it's not I guess overwhelming or too so stark that it could lose its quote unquote entertainment value. It doesn't do that at all. It strikes this perfect balance of all of these different things that I'm kind of talking about. The other thing too, this movie has got to be one of the best paced movies I've ever seen. Again, it's just under 3 hours, but this movie, the best way I can kind of describe this movie in a nutshell is it's lightning in a bottle. It's so kinetic and it moves so well. The pacing is so brilliant. The editing is just unbelievable. It's one of the best editing jobs I've ever seen in a movie. There's no the thing too is there's so many of these shots. There's one particular sequence. There's about two or three gigantic shots of where it feels like it's almost all one take. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil with, if anybody out there who has seen that movie, it's with starring Charlton Heston. There's a big opening sequence to that classic film where it's all one continuous shot. And there's a few things that happen in this movie around how the way it's shot that it really reminds me of that. But there's one sequence in particular that really stood out of this chase sequence, and it goes on for about maybe 20 minutes straight, and where it incorporates so many different things and so many different environments. And I'm like, wow, how the hell did he pull this off from a technical aspect? And the pacing is absolutely brilliant. And the thing is, it's got this tension throughout the entire movie. And this movie is kind of like a high octane movie, but it's never like exhausting. It's never this thing of where there is this extreme moment. It's never where it's the case of where there's like say there are very extreme elements to this film where it gets bonkers crazy, but there isn't this thing of sometimes you see in films that have this real high octane approach of where there's like all of this action and suspense, and then maybe the second or third act there's a lot of quiet parts to just kind of bring things down, and where it can be this razor's edge thing of maybe slowing the momentum down a little too much, or vice versa, where a film will just have this thread of where it's high octane the whole way through, and it can be maybe exhausting. This film doesn't have that. It just has this like perfect symmetry with the pacing and the editing, where it's you never lose interest. It never wanes. It never the fire is never kind of put out, even though there's all of these peaks and valleys throughout the film. It's brilliant, and the editing and the score also is another thing. It was this is another film that was scored by Johnny Greenwood from, of course, Radiohead. He's worked on a bunch of Paul Thomas Anderson films. He did the film score for There Will Be Blood, which is amazing. I own that on. I have a CD, the album version of that. He also did the music for Phantom Thread, which is a really cool movie. Also, so very different. I think he did the film score for The Master, and I think he did the music for Licorice Pizza. All completely different, and the music for this film is no exception. It's highly creative, so interesting. There's so much tension, really unorthodox, just like Paul Thomas Anderson style. Yeah, great film, great film. I would love to see this again. It is definitely a film to see in the big screen. And I saw that this movie is actually made, considering this is not. Well, I don't know. It's interesting because I don't think like Paul Thomas Anderson's films are like, they're not popcorn films. They're not made for maybe large audiences, but I think I think his films are really good and really interesting. And the thing that's, anybody out there, there's a lot of people out there that will complain that there's no original new kind of content coming out. It's, because we live in the age of sequels and reimaginings and prequels and Marvel movies and all of these things, and that there's no, original content and all of these things. And I think that that's not really true. I mean, we're as a film fanatic, a fan of film. I mean, I see the amount of films that come out is kind of staggering, and it's hard to keep up with it. But there's so much stuff coming out, and you know, yeah, I think on one hand, I've always I've always brought this up, and I always will probably, but my favorite decade being the '70s for film, and the early to mid '80s. I would say, a lot of those films that I talk about from those decades are films that might not necessarily be able to be made today, but I try not to get too, I guess, cynical and say, well, and I always refer to it as like the grandpa syndrome. Well, they don't make them like they used to. I think when things like this come along, when a film like this, when a movie like One Battle After Another comes out, it really establishes this thing. Well, no, there are still really fantastic movies coming out. And just last weekend I saw The Long Walk, which was an incredible movie. So it's like back to back 2 weeks. These are the last 2 weeks I've seen such amazing films. So, and I think that often when people do say that films are not, there's not really any good films being made or good albums being made when it pertains, or, when you could, bring up music. I think a lot of the times there's this hypocritical thing that happens of where those are the same folks that are not like, when films like this come out or albums like this come out, they're not really, supporting it. They're not really going out and bringing it to, to the forefront, like, and supporting something that is truly an original idea, or something that is all about original content, and something that is fresh and something that is exciting. I saw a review for this film with Chris Stuckman, and he really said, some really big things and great things about this film. But he had this thing where he was saying, where when he saw the film in the theater, there was like one other person, and he was like, Jesus, like he kind of made, during this his review for One Battle After Another, he kind of made this plea to his audience and to people in general, you know, please support this, please support this movie, please support other movies like this that come out, because we can't on one hand say that there's no new ideas being explored out there, and yet we're going to stay home and just stream movies. I mean, you can't do that. It's impossible. I mean, as an artist, or as a creator of content, especially when you're doing original material, you can do so many things by yourself. That's one great thing about the digital age and technology now. You can do so many things, promotional, aspects, to actually creating work. You can shoot a film on your phone. You can build your own, really beautiful state of the art recording studio at home. You can promote your work for free, basically, and have a big online presence. You can book your own tour. You can do all of these things that artists, and then you can also like do these crowdfunding things, and have your stuff like self-distributed to a degree. All of these things never were a possibility, 25, 30 years ago. And that's a bonus or a plus of the digital age that we live in. But at the same time, there's also so many downsides to it, because there is, the kind of the clickbait mentality. There is this thing of trying to compete with people who are complacent with only watching content at home. People's habits of, wanting to live or enjoy their life, or everything that they want to enjoy, whether it's food or however they consume media. They want to be able to enjoy it all at the comfort of their own home, and not spend very much money. So it's a tough sell, and a generational thing of where a lot of people just don't go out. And obviously with the last 5 years, that's just kind of ushered in that way of interacting with media even more. But please go out to see this movie. This is a movie that's meant to be seen on the big screen, and it's a visual feast. So yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. One of the best movies I've seen this year. One of my favorite. I think it's definitely one of the best Paul Thomas Anderson movies in recent times. So yeah, just incredible. What a thrill ride. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.